Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. So a grand jury has finally brought an indictment against Alec Baldwin for the shooting death of Helena Hutchins on the set of the movie Rust. This just happened today, and we can see this is the grand jury indictment dated January 19th, 1239, and Alexander Alec Ray Baldwin, grand jury indictment. So he is facing two charges, and these are alternative charges. So it's basically either you did this or you did that is the argument. So the first one is involuntary manslaughter through negligent use of a firearm. And so the allegation is that at Bonanza Creek Ranch on October 21st, he did cause the death of Helena Hutchins in the commission of negligent use of a firearm, which would be an unlawful act. The alternative is involuntary manslaughter without due caution or circumspection. So this is alleged at the same place and the same time, that he did cause the death of Helena Hutchins by an act committed with the total disregard or indifference for the safety of others, and the act was such that an ordinary person would anticipate that death might occur under the circumstances, a fourth-degree felony. So, because these are fourth-degree felonies, they are not the most serious charges he could be facing. I don't think he's looking at a lengthy period of jail, but I do think that it is important that these charges be brought, even though there may be some difficulty just because of the movie aspect. If this didn't happen on a movie set, I think that this would be an obvious conviction. But there's going to be some questions as to the movie set aspect of it. But I think it's worth bringing the charges because, quite frankly, I think what happened was shocking and shameful. And the indifference shown towards the safety of Ms. Hutchins, which ultimately resulted in her death, is tragic. So if you're not familiar with the sort of allegations, Mr. Baldwin was on a film set using a gun exactly like this one. This is the same make and model, and we're going to do what Alec Baldwin didn't do. Because if we're going to be handling a firearm, we're going to just flip it open. And you can see all cylinders are empty. That's what he didn't do. That's what he didn't insist on anyone else doing. That's what he didn't see anyone else doing. Instead, he was handed a gun. He was told, cold gun, and he accepted that without any checking. This, to my mind, is greatly below the standard of care. I don't accept a firearm from somebody who's like, oh yeah, it's unloaded, and then proceed to horse around with it. Especially given that what they were doing involved not just handling the firearm, but also pointing it at another living person. If you're going to do that, you really need to be sure. And quite frankly, it's rare that there's a circumstance where that should happen at all, but you really need to be sure. And he wasn't. Now, Alec Baldwin said that he pulled back the hammer, but that he didn't pull the trigger and the gun fired. Now, that is not how these guns work. In fact, the ballistics and forensics experts tested it, and they found that the only way you get this thing to fire is by pressing this bit here. That's what gets it to fire. They found that you could get it to fire while the hammer was forward if you hit it with a mallet, but Alec Baldwin wasn't hitting the gun with a mallet. What he said he was doing was practicing fanning. Now, fanning is a technique that is only really useful on certain old guns, but the reason why it's useful here is because when the hammer is down, if I pull the trigger, it does nothing. This is a single action firearm, which means that the only way you get it to fire is you have to draw the hammer back and then you pull the trigger. Now, people in various times have wanted to shoot these faster than that process of pull hammer back, pull trigger. And so fanning is you hold the trigger down and then you fan the hammer. The only way you can fan a gun like this is holding the trigger back. So when Baldwin said that he was fanning the gun, to my mind, that's an admission that he was holding the trigger. The other thing is that if you're not careful with your trigger discipline on these, and if you have your finger on the trigger, one thing about the sort of construction of the hand is that everything is interconnected. If you wiggle one finger, it can be difficult not to wiggle another. And in particular, if you have your finger on the trigger, when you're pulling back with your thumb, it's very difficult to not have your finger curve in. And when your finger curves in, that happens. Once you involuntarily fan the gun. All of this is sort of basic knowledge of the firearm, basic firearm handling. And what we do know from documents that have been released is that Mr. Baldwin was not apparently keen on following through with his safety training. There was training offered, and apparently it was a giant failure because he wouldn't get off his phone and he wouldn't pay attention. If you're going to be using a firearm on a movie set or anywhere else, you need to know how to do so safely. You can't just say, oh, well, it's not a big deal, I'm just going to rely on others. All of the safety rules are interlocking, such that when we say don't point a gun at anything you're willing to destroy and you're not willing to destroy, and keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire the gun, because there's multiple interlocking rules, you have to violate more than one rule at a time in order to have a fatal accident. Baldwin, unfortunately, was violating a whole lot of rules, and it doesn't seem like he was all that concerned about even knowing what the rules are. This is a tragedy, and a woman lost her life. And I know that the sort of argument that people will make here is that this is a movie set and Baldwin didn't have any obligation to learn any of this, that he could just rely on other people. And I don't think that is accurate. I don't think that you can handle something like a firearm, which has lethal potential, without taking at least some time and effort to be mindful of safety issues. It's just too important. There's too many potential, consequences. This notion of, well, I was just relying on other people. Well, you weren't, though, because other people said, hey, take the safety course, and he blew that off. You need to be able to handle a firearm safely if you're going to handle one safely. And Mr. Baldwin's fairly cavalier act here has not only resulted in the death of Ms. Hutchins, but also has caused tremendous impact to a large number of people in the film industry. There's a large number of armorers who are finding it difficult to stay in business because this has resulted in a major backlash against the use of firearms at all. Quite frankly, that isn't the lesson to take from this. The film industry and their use of firearms has been incredibly safe overall. The situations where somebody has lost their life have either been through tremendous carelessness or really tragic freak accidents. Far more people lose their lives on film sets operating motor vehicles than operating firearms. And it's a tragedy that there's a number of armorers and so forth that are losing their business because Alec Baldwin and also because Hannah Gutierrez-Reed were so careless. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is also facing charges on this, and those will end up going to trial separately. So I'm going to keep following this as it develops. We'll see what happens. Baldwin, through his lawyer, is vigorously disputing the charges. And I'm going to say, I originally thought Baldwin's lawyer might be some kind of slouch, because when I looked into him, basically he does Hollywood sort of stuff, is what it seems like. And he's actually been doing a really good job. He's been holding the prosecution's feet to the fire in a whole lot of different ways. So this might be a really interesting trial to watch. I'm certainly going to be following it. I think it's important that these charges are brought. I'm going to say, I think it may not end up being a conviction. There's some substantial places where a good lawyer, and Baldwin's lawyer appears to be a good lawyer so far, could muddy the waters. So we'll see. As things develop, I'll keep you in the loop. But thank you guys for watching. Please like this video, subscribe, share, all of those good things. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level: Lembas for the Elf, the CCFR, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I also want to thank my $20 supporter, or $20 level supporters: Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Kyle Fox, Drunkle of the Baileys, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters, who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.